Is Scott Frost the man for the job? J.D. Pickell from On 3 weighs in.
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on in to Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every single day. Joining me is my good friend, J.D. Pickell, national college football analyst for On 3. We're here to talk Scott Frost. He is back in Orlando, and we have not gotten JD's thoughts on the Scott Frost hire yet. JD, let's jump into this, man. How do you feel about this? Is this the right move? Some people calling this a retread. Some people calling this a genius move by Terry Mohajir bringing Scott Frost back to Orlando. How does JD Pickell feel about it?
I mean, if it is a retread, the last time he was in Orlando, things went pretty well. And so one of the things that I love about this hire, I get that college football's changed. I get the landscape still changing. Like, Mike, by the time we finish up this segment, college football might be in a totally different place. But what I love about this is you hired a guy who understands what he's working with at UCF.
Yeah.
And I have to believe for Scott Frost, he would not have taken a job like this if he didn't feel good about the resources, the trajectory, and the future for UCF in the Big 12. Because let's be real, like, he probably could have taken an OC job somewhere else at some point. He didn't have to jump back in and take a head coaching job at a Power 4 level. I think the money you get when you get fired as a head coach in college football usually takes care of you for a good amount of time, a couple of vacations you can take with that chunk of change. So all in all, the fact that he took the job tells me a lot, and the fact that it's somewhere he's familiar with, I think, is also extremely encouraging.
Elite coaches are what everybody's after in college football, JD. Look, when Saban left Alabama, who was going to step in was the question. And look, I think Alabama fans got hit with a reality check in Kalen DeBoer's first year. Like those two one-loss seasons that Saban was turning in seemingly like clockwork. Suddenly now you're sitting here with 3 losses for the first time in a really, really, really long time, and you don't know what to do with yourself. Does Scott Frost have the ability to be one of those elite coaching hires? Certainly, what he accomplished at UCF the first go around is what got him to Nebraska. But Frost had an interesting quote that I want to talk to you about, and I thought it was interesting. He said this. He said, there was a lot of pressure to take the Nebraska job. It was hard for me to leave UCF. It was emotional. When you're climbing the ladder of success in life, they tell you they forget to tell you to stop when you're happy. Yeah. Sounds like he was happy at UCF the first go round, but felt pressure to take the job and get out of here. Now he's back where he's happy. But how high is the ceiling here for Scott Frost, at UCF?
Well, I think that quote you just flashed on the screen there, we shouldn't just breeze past that if you're a listener. Like, the fact that Scott Frost is saying, hey, I felt some pressure to go back to my alma mater and go take, at the time, a Power 5 job. Like, it's hard to blame him and the way that things went at Nebraska or how they went. But to answer your question, look at what the Big 12 is. And, Mike, I feel like it's wide open, man. Like, the death of the Pac-12, the Big 12, shout out to them. They have done a phenomenal job stepping up and being like the crazy uncle in college football. We're up at 10 o'clock at night watching Big 12 After Dark every single Saturday. I mean, it was phenomenal every single weekend. And to add to that, I mean, persona of what the Big 12 is, we were coming off a year where the team that was picked to finish last in the conference a season ago in Arizona State just won the whole conference and had a bye in the college football playoff. So it's hard for me to say that there's a ceiling really for anybody in the Big 12 right now. And to make yourself feel better if you're a UCF fan, if it does become about resources, having one of the largest alumni networks in the entire United States, like, that has to help things. So I think that the Big 12 as a whole is, just like I mentioned, I think the throne is pretty open for the taking. And being in the state of Florida with those resources, with the talent you're surrounded by, if they can get something going on the field to attract some of those recruits and steal a couple of guys away from the other in-state powers, UCF is a place to me that it could get rolling pretty quickly with the right on-field product, which is, of course, the biggest obstacle in this whole situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, You said something interesting about the Big 12 being wide open. I think that bared out this year with Arizona State being picked by the media to finish dead last and making the college football playoff. And not only did they make it, JD, they provided us what was probably the most entertaining game of the playoff there with Texas. Cameron Scatterbu was one of the best quarterbacks in the country. They gave Texas a run for their money. It took Quinn Ewers doing what Quinn Ewers does at the last moment, give maximum drama there with Arizona State. But if Arizona State can do it, certainly UCF can do it. Now, as somebody who's lived in downtown Phoenix and in and around the Tempe area, I can tell you Orlando greater than Tempe. If I had to pick a place where I wanted to go play as an athlete, I'm certainly maybe considering Scott Frost, over those guys, in Tempe.
Yeah, I think with how hot it gets in Arizona, I don't disagree with the thought process there. But it's really curious to me to see who in the Big 12 puts all their chips to the middle first when it comes to NIL, because you hear Kenny Dillingham talk a lot about activating the Valley, and he did a great job last year in post-game press conferences saying, hey, if you enjoyed this win, if you enjoyed us cashing our over win total,
give us money.
And give it back to the collective. He's like, we got a good team, still underpaid. And so you look across the conference, and I mean, Texas Tech seems to be pushing a lot of their chips to the middle in the Big 12. Like, how quickly does that translate? I don't know. But UCF, when you talk about the resource power that a school like that should have, when we look at where college football is going and how open the Big 12 is, like, there's a part of me as we sit here in February in 2025, like, why not UCF? What's stopping UCF from being one of those schools that puts their money on the field and makes a power in Orlando? I don't see why it can't happen. It might take a second. I don't see why it can't happen.
I agree with you 100%. I mean, at the end of the day, you've got a lot of enthusiasm, and we'll talk about NIL in the next segment. But with Scott Frost returning, you have a guy that people want to give money to. Now, I've been to an Arizona State football game. I could tell you that is a relatively young football culture there. They have some weird traditions out there. And look, man, I just don't know that overall they're interested in football enough as a culture, right, for them to get, because what Dillingham is talking about is he's saying, hey, if you like what you saw this year, it is not sustainable unless we have cash. Right. Yeah. And I think that Scott Frost is a big enough name in Orlando to generate the sustainability from a financial standpoint to keep UCF in the discussion at a high level. JD Pickell on Scott Frost. Look, NIL is here to stay. It is a big part of this discussion. We're going to talk about what he needs to do on the NIL front with the changes that are coming right after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at PrizePicks. March basketball is here, guys, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With PrizePicks, you pick more or less on 2-player projections. If you're right, you can win up to $1,000 extra cash. Build your lineups. It's quick and easy. You get fast payouts, and they got Taco Tuesday deals going on where you get discounted projections for even more value. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 off instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 off instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. NIL is changing, JD. The schools may be owning more of the process. We may see collectives dissolving altogether or being absorbed into the university's financial structure. Is this a good thing, you think, for Scott Frost in a school like UCF to be able to say, you know what? We get to pick where we spend the dollars. Our coach is going to act more like a GM. And, are we headed towards salary caps for college football?
So the answer to that in terms of salary caps, I don't know. But here's my thought on this when it comes to UCF. If I'm UCF, I say keep your salary cap. Like you keep that number over there, because when we talk about, how they would compete with the other powers in college football, like Ohio State, Oregon, Alabama, whatever, if the money is equal, I think most high-profile recruits are going to say, well, I'm going to go then where the track record is of guys having success and going to the NFL and success on the field and winning national championships. I think the angle for UCF, in my opinion, is, okay, if there's no salary cap, we can spend X amount more dollars than whatever other school we're competing with. And in that way, we start to stockpile talent on our roster via the portal, via the high school level, and that can be our edge. So to me, if I'm UCF, I'm actually rooting against a salary cap, which I know sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but I think that's honestly the path for them to becoming such a power in the Big 12.
Yeah, I think that, honestly, with the changes that are coming right now, we're pretending like things aren't happening that are definitely happening, right? These coaches are 100% in on where money goes and who gets what. And right now they've got to pretend like they're not having these conversations, but they know what players cost. Matt Rule famously came out and said, if you don't have $1 million, you can't even sniff a top portal QB. And for UCF, that's where you were at. You bet all your NIL dollars on KJ Jefferson. And when he didn't work out, they were down to their fourth string quarterback, JD, and not because of injury. That's crazy for a major Division I college program to be on QB4 by midseason, and nobody got hurt. So KJ Jefferson benched. EJ Colson wasn't it. Ja'Cory Brown, dynamic with his legs, but struggled with his arm. And, I'm not sure that they got the quarterback of the future in the portal. I think Taven Jackson heads that line of QBs that they brought in there. But this is, to me, a lot of this is about having the right guy at the helm at the quarterback position. And that's where we see, I think, a lot of the NIL dollars going. That's what Scott Frost has to go find. That's where he has to make his mark, isn't it? It's at QB.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that was one of the things when you hired Scott Frost, you were assuming he would bring to the table. Now, how it went at Nebraska is how it went. But if there's one thing Scott Frost is known for, it's offensive football. And you can look back at what he did at UCF as being a pretty strong indicator of that. I think to zoom out a little bit more here, Mike, when you talk about the roster construction, I am really fascinated to see how teams approach just what you mentioned, the GM position in college football, because I think we're going to approach an era in the sport where it's not acceptable to miss on a portal quarterback. Like if we're spending $1 million, close to $2 million, you hear $3 million thrown out there for some of these top level guys, like we better hit. Like we better make sure we're getting what we're paying for. And so I think the way that you help mitigate that risk is you invest a lot more in personnel departments. You invest more in scouting. You invest more in your GM. Like James Blanchard at Texas Tech is a great example. I mean, a bunch of big name institutions Blue Bloods coming after the guy, and Texas Tech, to their credit, continues to give him a pay raise, and to his credit, continues to stay in Lubbock. So I think that's something to keep an eye on if I'm a UCF fan. The portal is always going to be important. I mean, as college football evolves, but making sure you have a high hit rate in the portal, I think that's going to be what separates a lot of schools, especially in the Big 12, where the margins seem pretty slim.
Do you think we see like true GMs now in college football where, at the NFL level, not every coach is given the power to pick his own players or to build his own team, right? They say you can coach them, but we're going to go find the guys and you can have some input. But ultimately, the GM in a lot of areas has the right to overrule and say, no, that's not the quarterback. We saw Saban come back to the college level for this reason, right? It was he famously wanted Drew Brees. He got overridden by his GM, and they went out and got Dante Culpepper. You know how that story ended. Drew Brees went on to be statistically one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever throw a football. And I can't tell you what Dante Culpepper is doing today or what he even did. I just know it wasn't great. But obviously, Saban had the eye for the talent. Now, if you're Scott Frost, you say, I trust my own eye, or I've got a team to coach. Let me bring somebody in here to handle the money and the player personnel decisions, and so I can just coach football.
I think there's going to be a lot of freedom for there to be some flexibility there, because if it's me, like I want Kirby Smart still being able to recruit the guys that he wants to recruit. Like I want the elite recruiters to still be able to flex that muscle. But to your point, that's going to be a thing where I think GMs and, quite frankly, ADs are working pretty closely together. Like I talked to somebody in the scouting world that said it's not going to be a thing where GMs follow coaches. It's going to be GMs follow ADs, and that's kind of how that whole thing works out. So I think how it's evolving is really interesting. I think over the course of the next 5-ish years, we're going to start to see the GM role more and more defined, because the great ones right now in college football can recruit, and at the GM position, they can talk NIL, they can talk how they fit in terms of a scheme and a roster. And so all those things I think come together where you're seeing the separators, the Courtney Morgans at Alabama. As we mentioned, James Blanchard at Texas Tech, Chad Bowden at USC is doing a phenomenal job. I think the elite recruiting departments are going to be led by an elite recruiting GM. And so if you're a head coach, you're saying, okay, I want to have some say in this, but if I trust the guy pulling the strings over there for us, and when we like what we're getting in a roster, that's one less thing on my plate. I get to go coach football if I'm Lincoln Riley. I get to go call the defense if I'm Kirby Smart, or whatever he chooses to do with the extra time that he is afforded, apparently, when it comes to the future, hopefully, for a school like that where they can have a GM oversee some things.
This creates some interesting dynamics, I think, where, the GM goes out and gets a guy, and then that guy doesn't work out, and the GM saying, oh, you didn't coach him up. He's like, no, you gave me a bum.
Yeah.
Does it lengthen my leash as a coach, or does it shorten it because the GM is now pushing to get rid of me? Like, where this is going, it's turning into semi-pro sports, JD. That's what Scott Frost is facing. He's taking over UCF at a time where it's becoming more like the pros and less like college.
And I wonder how that's going to impact the coaching carousel, Mike. Like, I wonder if in a couple of years it's, well, hey, X coach would have taken X job. However, he's not taking that because the GM's going to have all the say over the roster. Well, it would have been a great fit. It's a great coach. Well, he's not taking it because of the job he's walking into. Whereas another school might say, hey, you come here, you get to have, your say on everything when it comes to the roster in tandem with who your GM is. So, no, but what you just said about it being professional sports, like, I mean, shoot, Mike, our own playoff is starting to trend more and more like the NFL playoff here as we have this thing evolve, which, as long as we're able to maintain the soul of college football, not to get too nostalgic or romantic here, but as long as we're able to maintain what separates Saturday from Sunday, we're in a good place. But I tell you, Mike, hey, we're flirting with that line here, brother. We're flirting with the margins that are making college football what it is. So I get it. It's happening. I'm going to be a part of it as we progress here. I know you are as well, being a part of covering the sport, but not all of it I'm 100% on board with.
Yeah. I got to say, there are going to be some interesting discussions to be had about how things are being managed, JD, once these coaches get into this process. If I'm Scott Frost, I'm reaching out to my NFL contacts, and I'm maybe studying that model to see how I can be a better coach at this level now with these new changes, and seeing what works at that level, and try to get ahead of the curve in terms of how to manage it. I think that guys like Saban and that have been successful at this level, his superpower was staying ahead of changes or adapting quickly once changes happen. So, we saw during that time where Alabama was 3 yards in the cloud of dust football, and he lost a couple games to Auburn famously, and that, that high flying offense. And he said, you know what? F it. I'm going to go hire Lane Kiffin. And since then, Alabama became quarterback U.
Yeah. Without a doubt. And it's funny too, like you mentioned Alabama in that context. They were able to, I think, be so flexible because of the Alabama brand, because of Nick Saban. And now we're going to see teams be able to be flexible, I think, in large part, going back to our NIL conversation, because of what you have from a resource level. Hey, can we afford to overhaul our personnel in the span of one portal cycle to go from 3 yards in a cloud of dust to being a spread offense? And at UCF, to take this back to, everything going on out there in Orlando, like, I think the resources are, I can't speak to how tapped or untapped they are, but I believe they're there. With that alumni base, I believe they're there, which I think is the exciting thing.
Yeah, they're there. You just have to provide the enthusiasm and the excitement around what you're building, and those dollars will start to flow. Talking to people in and around the program, talking to former alumni who have a lot of dollars to spend. They're just saying, look, man, if you've got something that we're excited about, we'll give the money. But look, how high should the bar be with that, with those expectations and with those NIL dollars? We'll talk about that next on Locked On UCF. Where's the bar for Scott Frost in UCF? Should it be what Arizona State did last year? Is that realistic? And where should the bar be every year? Because this is a rebuild. JD,
Yes.
This is a rebuild.
Yes.
He is rebuilding UCF football. And in a rebuild, sometimes you can have that flash in the pan year with the guy who just went out, Gus Malzahn. What he did at his previous stop at Auburn was he took them all the way to the national title game in year one and never reached those heights again. So maybe he set a little bit of an unrealistic expectation for Auburn fans that he was unable to live up to. And every maybe 4 years, they were good and then fell back off in between. Can Scott Frost build a sustainable winner, I think, is the question. And should fans expect that? Like, what should they expect this year, and what should they expect 3 years from now?
I think this year is all about getting back to neutral, in my opinion, because last year, you missed a bowl game, and it's frustrating because you bring in KJ Jefferson and all the excitement. Now you bring in Scott Frost. To me, it's about, hey, let's just get back on our feet. Let's get to a bowl game. And just what you said a moment ago about potentially unlocking some of those resources. If I'm Scott Frost and we win 6 games, we win 7 games, whatever it ends up being, to me, I'm saying, okay, the free trial is now over. I put my hand out and I say, let's put the money right here in my hand so we can go in and get you more of this. Because I maxed out what we have on this roster by getting to, let's be generous and say they get to 8 wins with a bowl win. I don't think that's a bad year by any stretch. You double your win total from the year before. And at that point now, then you get some momentum. Maybe the boulder's not all the way rolling downhill just yet, but you've pushed it up to a place where if you have success the following year, you go pop and win 10 games, then things really get rolling, because I have to imagine at that point the resources, the floodgates open quite a bit in that way. And so resources plus surrounded by so much talent in the state of Florida, plus you're in the Big 12, like all these things to me combine to where it's got to start with one snowflake. It's how an avalanche starts. One snowflake. Let's get to neutral. Let's make a bowl game, and at that point, then we can really get some things humming. If they go to the Big 12 title game this year, though, Mike, like Kenny Dillingham did last season for ASU, build the statue to Scott Frost.
Yeah. I think that will be one of the best coaching jobs we've seen in college football in some time. Whenever you take a roster that may be a little bit middling and you coach them to, like Dillingham had. Now he had some good backs, but let's be clear, nobody was talking about Cameron Scadaboo before this year. Yeah. Nobody saw that kind of year coming, right? Yeah. So do you have that? Now look, UCF had one of the best backs in college football last year in RJ Harvey. He was gangbusters. He was actually dynamite. And what ended up happening was there was no support for him. They were a one-dimensional football team, and you've got to find that second dimension if you're Scott Frost so that you can get to that next gear. Because if you can't throw the ball in today's college football, these defenses will eat you up. It's rare to have those run offenses where we're running it, but you can't stop it. They're going to get to you eventually. And right now, I don't know if in the trenches UCF is where they need to be to run that sort of offense. So Scott Frost hired McKenzie Milton. I want to close on this as his quarterback coach. McKenzie Milton was his quarterback in 2017 when they went undefeated. I think it's a good move, JD, to have a guy not that removed from major college football, coaching guys on what it means to play college football in today's game. But if you're Scott Frost, how much do you lean on Milton, and how much of that do you keep close to the vest? Because you don't have to win a championship next year, but you do have to show progress towards, you know what I mean? Like, you won 4 games this year, so the bar's on the floor. But, I think getting, Milton and Frost getting UCF to a bowl game, should it be a reasonable expectation?
Absolutely. And I think you said something interesting there about McKenzie Milton not being that far removed from playing college football himself. he's going to be able to get in these quarterback meetings with these guys and have a different level of credibility right off the bat. Like, yes, he's a UCF legend in that sense, but also the fact that he's talking about a defense that he played against and that same scheme still resonates to some degree with a guy like Taven Jackson. Taven Jackson, I'm really excited about, Mike. I don't know if he's going to, win the job out of spring or what all that looks like, but the one thing I will say about him, when you look at his career, at every stop, guys that know quarterbacks take Taven Jackson, like commits to Tennessee and Josh Heupel takes Taven Jackson. He doesn't end up having the success he wanted to have there, but I mean, he's behind, Joe Milton, who waited for forever for his shot. And then eventually, Taven Jackson decides to transfer to Indiana. Kurt Cignetti, a guy who brings in a 6-year quarterback in Curtis Rourke, who's just like MAC player of the year before, doesn't get on the field. But again, someone who knows quarterbacks says, I want Taven Jackson. Again, now Scott Frost knows quarterbacks, takes Taven Jackson. I'm not saying that's everything, but I don't think it's nothing either. So I'm really, really interested to see the dynamic between Frost, Jackson, and Milton, how that all trends.
Yeah, dynamic quarterback play is the way to the promised land in today's college football. If you don't have it, you better have a really, really good everything else. You better have a top-tier defense. My best example for this might be like Georgia in that first of the back-to-backs, with Stetson Bennett. I mean, he had whole games where he threw the ball maybe 12 times, and they went all the way to a championship that year with Stetson Bennett. But even in his second year, he had to raise his game for them to repeat. And not only did he raise his game, he made it to New York. That's how much he raises his game. So, it's an outlier, I think, to have success without that play at quarterback. But if you look back at that 2021 Georgia defense, it was one for the ages. And
NFL defense,
100%. So if you're Scott Frost, you want to find your guy at quarterback, but you don't want to ignore the defensive side of the ball as well. You want to get somebody in who you can turn that defense over and can build you a defense that will provide you some cushion in case you find yourself in a situation where you bet the farm on a guy like KJ Jefferson and it didn't work out, right? So interesting stuff, man. I think that UCF is such an intriguing program in terms, and the potential has always been there. Now you're one of the big four. So if you run undefeated through the Big 12, they can't keep you out like they did in 2017. JD Pickell, national college football analyst for On3 Sports. I want to thank you for joining me. Before we get out of here, tell people where they can find you.
Oh, man, well, I appreciate having me on, brother. Always a blast talking ball with you. But yeah, if you want to follow our stuff over at the On3 YouTube channel, or you can follow me on the socials, Instagram, Twitter, at JD Pickell. If you're watching on YouTube, you see the handle there. But no, man, it's a blast to talk ball with you, and always a pleasure getting to chop it up, man. Hey, we're right around the corner. Spring ball is just a little blimp on the horizon. They'll be here soon.
Yeah, it is. It is. Thank you so much for joining me today, JD. And thank you guys for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. For your second listen, go check out our friends at Locked On Big 12. Our guy, Jake Toll, giving you all you can handle of Big 12 content, including the UCF Knights. You can find Locked On Big 12 on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. You can find us here tomorrow on Locked On UCF.